Greetings and welcome, everyone. I'm Kimberly Charrington, and I'd like to welcome each of you on behalf of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies, otherwise known as NIDS, for tuning into today's Huessy Seminar, where the most important interaction is with you. NIDS is a 501c3 organization that provides deterrence education by hosting live and virtual events, podcasts, publications on global security, as well as workshops and courses through our NIDS Academy, all in the interest of advancing peace and promoting stability through a strong national security and nuclear deterrent. You can see more of what we have to offer and get involved at thinkdeterrence.com. Our next virtual Huessy seminar will be held on May 23rd. We have Dr. Philip Carber is speaking on strategic shifts in Russia's tactical and expanding theater nuclear competitive advantage. June 6th, we have Matt Kostlow, Senior Analyst at the National Institute for Public Policy. June 13th, we have Lieutenant General Eunbam Chun, who will be sharing his perspectives on the implications of a nuclear-armed South Korea. We also have 3 live events coming up on at the Capitol Hill Club. So if you're in town, we'd love to have you come. May 16th, we have breakfast with Lieutenant General Andrew Jabara on the role of Sentinel and B-21. June 3rd, we have ICBMs and bombers, a status update with Lieutenant General Lutton, Deputy Commander at U.S. Air Force Global Strike Command, and Uzi Rubin live on June 27th, addressing the growing concerns of missile threats in the Middle East. We have 2 more events coming up in July, and you'll see those invitations coming out soon. We have Rose Gottenmiller and Matt Kronig of the Skrokoff Center. And so you'll see more about those coming up on our events page at NIDS at thinkdeterrence.com. Please feel free to go there to register for all of our events, but you could also email me directly to get your colleagues and friends on the guest list for the future. During our presentation today, we encourage you to write your questions in the chat box at any time, beginning at the very beginning of our session here. And we will read those questions to our guest today as they come in during the Q&A session. If you like a question that someone else posted, feel free to give it a thumbs up so we make sure to give those questions priority. I want to introduce our host for today's Huessy seminar, Mr. Peter Huessy. He is President and Senior Director of Strategic Deterrence Studies at Geostrategic Analysis and a Senior Fellow here at NIDS. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Kimberly, very much. I want to welcome our audience today. What I'm asking Jim Howe to do today is to lay out the potential or projected nuclear warheads and systems that China and Russia will have in not just 2035, which is what the news has been about, but let's go another 10 years in 2044. Remember, 20 years from now is the same time it was between the end of the breakup of the USSR and the signing of the New START Treaty. So that 20-year time frame. And what I want Jim to address is it's assumed that the Chinese and Russians have nuclear weapons to deter, but do they in fact have nuclear weapons to blackmail and coerce people? And have they adopted, like Mr. Putin has, this escalate to win strategy? Does that also characterize what China's up to? Lack of transparency on China is a serious problem. So yes, some of this is we are projecting or guesswork, but it has to be based on reasonable assumptions. I want to welcome Jim Howe here. He's also going to be speaking to our June 24th Triad Symposium in Shreveport. Jim, on behalf of NIDS, I want to welcome you. Kimberly's going to be putting up your slides and we'll go through them. So welcome, Jim, and it's all yours, sir.
Thank you. As Peter mentioned, I'm going to talk to you about China and Russia's strategic and theater nuclear weapons. And I'll talk to what they currently have and what the 2045 forecast is. And then, just as importantly, what the potential U.S. responses are. Next, please. Bottom line up front. Do you have that, Kimberly?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Russia has determined to maintain their superpower status. To do that, they have to rely on nuclear weapons. They intend to win by achieving escalation dominance at all levels of nuclear conflict, and I'll talk to that in a minute. There is uncertainty about Russia's deployed strategic nuclear forces. What's their actual size? Have they been uploaded? Because it's been 5 years since the last inspection. The buildup capability of the Russian SNF is very large, ranging up to 700 plus SNDVs and 5,700 warheads, and could grow further. Similarly, the buildup capability of theater nuclear forces is very large. There's uncertainty about its capabilities and size, but in the thousands from 2 to 10,000 plus. The Russian SNF policy, strategy, and forces are undergoing significant changes to ensure Russia retains its status as a great power. For example, the nuclear threats have successfully influenced the quantities, types, and timing of the U.S. and allied aid to Ukraine. They've been making technology advances in accuracy and warhead design. These are enabling both strategic and theater nuclear warfare. But Russia is a highly dangerous adversary. They're far less vulnerable than the U.S. and a nation in decline, consequently a risk taker. Next, please. This chart shows the escalation ladder there on the left-hand side, and starting at the bottom, we have cyber and electromagnetic warfare and influence operations. These are integrated at all levels. They're used in peace and war, and the magnitude of their use becomes scenario dependent. But as we see in Ukraine, they're extensively used there to include sabotage operations against NATO countries. Russia is also expanding their conventional global strike capability, airship, and sub with long-range cruise missiles, although ICBMs, conventional ICBMs, remain aspirational. Their objective is to conduct offensive conventional operations under nuclear force protection, as we're seeing in Ukraine. I would also note that the Russian long-range cruise missile performance in Ukraine shows severe reliability and survivability issues, with up to 70 to 90% intercepted. They're modernizing and expanding their non-strategic nuclear forces with accurate, low yield, clean, and tailored effects nuclear weapons. They intend them to be once again an instrument of policy. This was approved by Yeltsin in 1999 and confirmed by the CIA. They're developing policy and capability for future strategic nuclear warfare, employing limited destruction nuclear attacks, their Sadset doctrine, which is integrated with conventional strikes and defenses. They intend to use their SNF to conduct selected nuclear execution options on adversary nuclear forces, bases, admin and political centers, and war production. The objective is to limit damage, control escalation, and achieve victory. If that doesn't do it, then they move on to their terror weapons for interwar deterrence, blackmail, coercion, and if necessary, destruction of the adversary nation, militarily, politically, and economically. They're deploying nuclear-powered torpedoes with 100 megaton warheads. They've discussed ICBMs with 50 megaton warheads to precipitate geophysical mass destruction. That's earthquakes and volcanoes. They're developing nuclear-powered cruise missiles. Is it going to carry nuclear warheads, or will it be used for repeated high-power microwave attacks? They would conduct unrestricted cyber warfare, as well as conduct unrestricted super EMP attacks. Next, please. There's significant uncertainty exists on Russia's future strategic nuclear forces, their capabilities and size, what numbers are going to be required as technologies improved. Russia has been conducting extensive RV flight tests, or these MARVs, hypersonic glide vehicles, RVs with terminal sensors. These provide accuracy. With improved accuracy, that enables low-yield warheads, which enables more warheads per SNDVs, which means you can cover more targets. And the extensive hydronuclear test enables new and improved warhead development without testing. For their IC and SL production, they have Votinsk, which produces approximately 40 a year of the Yars and Bulava. They have Krasnoyarsk that's going to produce Sarmat, probably around 10 a year if they ever get started, as well as a new liquid SLBM. And Kunichev produced the SS-19. In its heyday, the USSR produced over 200 ICs and SLs a year, so they have significant growth potential. Their current bomber modernization and production is very slow. Their new production, Tu-160M2, first flight was in January of 22. They plan on producing at least 3 a year. To date, they haven't produced any. For the PAC-DA stealth bomber, that's been delayed and probably will never fly. For their Russian history of deception and treaty violations, further limits U.S. visibility into their SNF. Their SNF will in fact be integrated with defenses, both active and passive, which will impact future SNF force structure. For their warhead numbers, they have considerable uncertainty because of limited transparency of Russian nuclear-capable force status. They have basically 3 classes of warheads. Light warheads are about 90 kilograms with 90 to 150 KT, mediums, and those are on the Bulava. The mediums, 200 to 500 kilograms, they're on the Yars, and the heavies, 500 to 1,200 kilograms and up to 1.2 megaton yield, they're on the Sarmat. And again, these estimates of RV numbers are limited by the maximums that have been tested on the missile. I didn't go beyond that. Russia is in decline, and a combination of sanctions and limitations on technology, resources, and financing will limit ICs and SLs in bomber development. Production currently is stagnating, even though SNF is first priority. It actually appears that TNF may now become first priority, as I'll discuss a little later. So as we look at the Russian ICBMs for 2025, we have the systems there on the left-hand side, and across the top we have the numbers of SNDBs that they have, number of warheads allocated to each, the number of New START treaty warheads that are allowed, as well as what the potential, and next is the potential, and then we also have the 2045 forecast. The SS-18 will probably be out of the inventory in the early 2030s. It's going to be replaced by the Sarmat. They reportedly have moved into production and have one deployed. However, most of the expertise was in Ukraine, where the SS-18 was built. They also recently had an accident with their single test silo that exploded. And so it's probably going to be 1 to 3 years before they can resume testing. They plan on having at least 46, although they could have 55 to 180. So out in 2045, they potentially could have 920 RVs. For the 19s, they're pretty much out of the inventory. There's uncertainty whether they're still active or not, but they do have 18 of them that are carrying the Vanguard. The Sarmat will eventually carry the Vanguard, but number is unknown. For the RS-12, both silo and mobile, they carry 1 RV, although they could carry up to 4 to 7. For the RS-24 Yars, they've been tested with 6. There's been reports of 10, although that's highly unlikely. They actually carry 4 mediums, but they've been reportedly downloaded to 3. We also have the both the silo and mobile. There's also the Yars S. They have 36 of those. They carry 3 RVs. They also have the M, which carries 2 independent post-boost vehicles. To date, none of those have been deployed. They also have the Keter that's going to replace or reinforce the Yars about 2030, when the Yars is only 20 years old. So if we look at the totals for 2025, Russia has 326 missiles, although General Karakayev has stated several times it has 400 ICBMs on combat duty. These carry 906 start countable warheads, although they could be uploaded to 1960 to 2190. For 2045, they would have 983 missiles, which could carry 2726 to 3245 or 46 warheads. Again, this forecast is based on maintaining the current IC force structure, although that could increase. And I should also note that the mobile ICs, the reloads are possible, potentially 2 to 3 to 1. Next, please. Okay, now on the SLBMs, we've got the Deltas that will be going out of the inventory probably no later than 35. They carry the SSN-23 that can carry 8 to 12 RVs, although they notionally only carry 4. They're being replaced by the Bori. They currently 8 Boris. There's 2 currently under construction with another 2 to 4 planned. They carry the Bulava SSN-32. The Arcturus is going to replace the Bori. That will carry 12 SLs with a 2037 IOC when the lead Bori is only 25 years old. They also have the Poseidon torpedo. They have 2 boats in the water. Each can carry 6 torpedoes. They plan on having 4 to 6 of these, although to date, no others have been laid down. And that, again, torpedo is going to carry a 100 megaton warhead, but they plan on having 24 to 36 of those by 2045. So total for 2025, they got 12 boats with 192 missiles. They could have 768 start countable warheads, although they could actually carry 1312 to 1632. And for 2045, they'll have 17 boats with 260 missiles that can carry 1560 to 1704 warheads. Something to keep an eye on is the Yasin SSGN with the Zircon hypersonic missile that can travel 1,000 kilometers in less than 5 minutes, which means if they're sitting off the coast, they could take out Washington in just a few minutes. They currently have 5 Yasins with 12 planned, total of 384. USASW cannot maintain track on the Yasin, so there's a potential for a surprise NCAC cubed attack supporting a Russian strategic nuclear attack. Next, please. For the bombers, the Bears are being substantially modified with new engines and electronics. However, to date, there's been no Tu-95s that have in fact been modernized. As I mentioned, the Tu-160 new production has been significantly delayed. They have modernized the 16 Tu-160s that they do have. The 160s will carry up to 12 kh BD Alchem's with a 6,500 kilometer range. As I mentioned earlier, the PAC-DA stealth bomber is unlikely to be developed and deployed due to technology, resources, and financing issues. So total for 2025, they'll have 65 to 67 bombers carrying 586 start countable warheads that they could be uploaded to 964. And for 2045, they'd have 66 bombers with 792. And this illustrates that Russia is, in fact, a missile-centric force. So total for 2025, 619 SNDVs, 2260 start countable, but could be uploaded to 4786. For 2045, 709 SNDVs that could be uploaded up to 5742. So warhead numbers do matter to penetrate defenses, cover the targets, achieve the necessary damage levels, and achieve conflict objectives. Next, please. Russia is huge. They've got 11 time zones. They have 5 naval fleets, 5 air armies, 16 ground armies, 20 types of weapons. They have U.S. NATO scenarios that they're facing. They're facing China scenarios in the future. All of this certainly requires more than 2,000 warheads for their nuclear scenarios, but how many? Next, please. Russian theater nuclear weapons are cloaked in secrecy. That equals great uncertainty. According to Arbatov, Russian SS 1991 inventory was 21,700 required to wage war against NATO. The force was reportedly reduced by 75%. That would leave 5,425 weapons in the inventory. According to Mikhailov, he advocated a force of 10,000 accurate, low-yield, clean, tailored effects warheads to make war once again an instrument of policy. This was approved by Yeltsin in '99, confirmed by the CIA. General Hyten in 2020 stated Russia has deployed thousands of low-yield weapons. According to Rogov and Felgenauer, they have 3,000 to 10,000. General Habiger in 2002 Senate testimony stated Russia has 12,000 to 18,000. Federation of American Scientists says no, they only have 1,558. But they also caveat that, saying that numbers are highly uncertain. U.S. Department of State, in their arms control report, stated 1,000 to 2,000 weapons. General Ashley, DIA, 2019, Russia has 2,000, but will grow significantly over the next decade, and they can produce thousands of warheads annually. If you did a loadout of the current land, air, and sea non-strategic nuclear forces, per their doctrine, that would require 5,935 weapons. I did a study looking at a Russian initial attack on NATO. That would require 1,287 to 1,523 in the initial strike, but then over 10,000 to actually conduct war with NATO. We have the expansion of Otinsk to produce Streletsnik and Rubez, potentially up to 300 a year. Russia has also stated they're going to do an expansion of their ballistic and cruise missile production, and certainly their cruise missile production has significantly increased due to the war in Ukraine. But effective defenses will also drive warfare changes. For example, as we see in Ukraine, where they're 70 to 90% effective. Next, please. If advanced technology nuclear weapons enable theater nuclear warfare, what are the implications for strategic nuclear war? According to Murayev, strategic missile systems should be capable of conducting surgical strikes using both highly accurate, super low-yield nuclear weapons, as well as conventional ones. And he went on to say that groupings of non-nuclear ICs and SLs may appear. Mikhailov stated that existing strategic nuclear warheads are to be upgraded so they can be rapidly and simply reprogrammed to deliver strikes with yields of hundreds of tons of TNT. And Russia reportedly has deployed precision nuclear warheads with 50 to 200 ton yields on some Liner and Bulava SLs. That would require high accuracy, as well as KH-102 cruise missiles. And I would also note that the Yars and Bulava use the same post-boost vehicle and can carry the same warheads. For Russian SNF policy, strategy, and forces, they are undergoing significant changes to ensure Russia retains its status as a great power and can restore the Russian Empire. But without accurate information on Russian SNF numbers and capabilities to inform the American public of the scope and character of the Russian threat, it becomes impossible for the U.S. to formulate a credible deterrence policy, strategy, and force structure to maintain U.S. security and national interest. So consequently, strategic nuclear forces armed with new technology nuclear warheads provide game-changing capabilities. This is illustrated in this next chart. This shows illustration of a study that was done back in 1986 of a Soviet attack on U.S. strategic nuclear forces. They attacked 1,215 targets. They used 28, 39 warheads. Most of them were double tapped with a ground burst and air burst. The total casualties from that attack was 21 to 77 million. I repeated that essentially that same attack using accurate low-yield weapons. Casualties from blast and fire were 12 to 16,000. Fallout, none. Total casualties, I repeat, only 12 to 16,000. Same target set. So the U.S. potentially could be self-deterred from responding. Food for thought. Next, please. So Russia is a dangerous adversary. Some of the key factors. A revisionist Russia objective of expanding a sphere of influence is enabled by their belief that the West is risk adverse, as we see in Ukraine. Russia is a nation in decline with little hope of recovery. Therefore, it's more of a risk taker, as we've seen in Syria, Ukraine, and their extensive use of nuclear threats against the U.S. and our allies. For their strategic and theater nuclear force levels provide Russia escalation dominance. The Russian nuclear warhead production infrastructure has been modernized and can produce 1,000 to 3,000 warheads annually, supporting a force of 10,000 to 45,000 weapons with a 10 to 15-year warhead life. And again, according to General Ashley, DIA 2019, they have the capacity to produce thousands of warheads annually. So how many do they actually have today? Again, Russia is far less vulnerable than the U.S. They can and will take far more risk. They have active defenses. They have a nationwide air and cruise missile defense and will have a nationwide ballistic missile defense by about 2030. They have very extensive passive defenses, protective bunkers, very hardened and very deeply buried bunkers for the leadership, as well as extensive civil defense for the population, which is further protected by geography. But the U.S. needs to know the enemy, understand the enemy, its posture, and its values. Next, please. So now we look at China, what their strategic and theater nuclear forces are. But China's rapid nuclear breakout is unprecedented and constitutes a classic strategic deception. Next, please. The IC estimates of Chinese SNF and TNF is inconsistent with reality. If we look at the IC estimates, which is most authoritative open source, in 2024, they stated that China had 500 to 600 nuclear warheads. Also in the CMPR, China Military Power Report, they had 400 missiles. At 1 RV per missile, that equals 400, plus 72 SLs, plus 20 bomber weapons, that equals 492, plus maybe another 100 to 300 TNF, is more than 600 warheads. However, all the missiles are merged with 2 to 10 RVs each. If we just look at 3 RVs per missile, the numbers are 1,200 ICs, 216 SLs, plus 20 bombers, and again, the 100 to 300 TNF, which is likely more, is 1,736 in 2024, not 600. The IC estimates saw that there's going to be 550 launchers, that there are 550 launches in 2024. At 50 to 75 ICs per year, the remaining 150 silos will be filled by 2026. 320 silos equals 320 to 3,200 warheads. IC has also stated that the 2030, they'll have more than 1,000, and by 2035, about 1,500. So if 2024 is not correct, how accurate are 2030 and 2035? But there's certainly an analytical disconnect between visible missile numbers, capabilities, and assessed growth in nuclear warheads. Why? Likely incorrect assumptions, as well as evidence contradicts preferred narrative established by seniors. But current open source SNF and TNF estimates are shown in the following charts. For the Chinese ICBMs, or correction, for their strategic nuclear forces, we see the launchers there on the left-hand side, and then across the top, the number of SNDVs that are they actually have, number of warheads that are allocated to each, so total number of warheads for 2025. And so for 2025, if we look at the bottom there, they have 796 ICSL and bomber systems. Those systems can carry anywhere from 1932 to 4914 warheads. If we look at 2035, they then have a total of 1288 SNDBs, which could carry up to 3350 to 6711 warheads. Now, those numbers are considerably outside of what one normally sees, but that's what the math tells one. If we look at the TNF, again, the systems are on the left-hand side. At one point or another, all of these have been declared to be dual capable by the U.S. intelligence community. We have the class that they're in, their range, the numbers of each, the number of launchers, I should say, the number of missiles, and here again, they can have up to 4 missiles per launcher. And then we also have the numbers for 2035. So if we look at 2025, they have 1166 missiles, which could carry up to 3812 missiles. And if we assess that 10 to 20% of those are nuclear, then that gives us 380 to 760. If we look at 2035, we have 3190 launchers and up to 12,690 missiles. And again, if we do 10 to 20%, it's 1269 to 2538 potential nuclear warheads. But considering the potential number of targets in India, Russia, Japan, and U.S. allies that the China needs to target, the number of nuclear warheads required is likely significantly higher than estimated, perhaps 30 to 50% more. Next, please. So both Russia and China nuclear forces are characterized by great uncertainty. In terms of force levels, Russia under New START, they've got 1550, although uploaded, they could have over 3,000 and potentially over 5,000. For China, DIA, 1,000 by 2030, 1,500 by 1535, likely significantly underestimated, as I have indicated. So again, both Russia and China nuclear forces are characterized by great uncertainty. Russia, New START, 1550, uploaded 3,000, potentially 5,000. China, DIA, 1,000 by 2030, 1,500 by 2035, likely significantly underestimated, as I have indicated. China is also developing a DF-51 ICBM, the Type 096 SSBN with the new SLBM, as well as a conventional, I repeat, a conventional ICBM. The non-strategic nuclear forces, Russia has 2 to 10,000 plus. China claims not to have any, yet has hundreds of dual-capable missiles. For their force capabilities in terms of yearly production for warheads, Russia can produce 1,000 to 3,000. China probably well into the hundreds. For missile production, Russia has Votinsk at about 40 a year of ICs and SLs. Khrunichev can certainly produce large numbers, as well as Krasnoyarsk. China can produce 50 to 100 DF-31As or 41s per year. They can produce tens of DF-5s. I would note that DF-5s are based on their SLVs, and they can produce over 60 SLVs a year. In terms of intent, Russia, coercion, certainly, as we've seen in Ukraine. They certainly want to deter the U.S. in Eurasia and warfighting if necessary. China, they want to deter U.S. involvement in Asia, cover conventional war, and warfighting if necessary. Next, please. So the U.S. intel community continues to underestimate the rate and numbers of Chinese nuclear buildup. Chairman Xi stated the intent to achieve a great use in strategic capabilities, accelerate the PRS pace of development, and make enhanced breakthroughs in strategic deterrence capability. Yet in 2021 DoD annual report to Congress, the number of warheads on the PRC's land-based ICBMs capable of threatening the U.S. is expected to grow to roughly 200 in the next 5 years. That's by 2026. It's currently 638, so that's a significant underestimation. Further intelligence community 2022 statements say Chinese strategic nuclear warheads will grow to 1,000 by 2030. Simple math indicates a significant underestimated, as 320 to 360 silos will be completed with DF-31s or 41s carrying 1080 to 3600 warheads, plus another 366 to 794 SLs and bomber warheads, for a total of 1446 to 4394 by 2426. And Admiral Richards, to Stratcom Intel analyst on Chinese intelligence, throw away anything over a month old and cut any intelligence time projection at least in half. And more recently, the HASC ranking member of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, 2025, the CCP ICBM fleet has exceeded U.S. intelligence estimates, and ODNI annual threat assessment actually ignored Chinese silos and their buildup. Next, please. So if we look at the two-peer competitor problem, which I believe we're at a strategic inflection point, for the U.S. and Russia, we have sort of a balanced deterrence. We each have 1550 warheads, supposedly. So what does the U.S. need to deter China? How many targets with what weapon capabilities? When China has a population that's about 4 times that of the U.S., they've got a GDP almost as big, and in terms of SNF by 2035, they have 2990 to 6351 warheads. For TNF, they could have 1269 to 2538. So if we look at statements by U.S. officials, Ben Perang, our current force posture may well be insufficient, is necessary, but may well be insufficient. We have a multiple challenger problem. We have collaboration between nuclear-armed adversaries as potentially. Russia's an acute threat. China's a peer. And so we may require deploying more and/or different capabilities than we feel today. But the U.S. needs an integrated force of nuclear weapons, long-range precision strike, and defenses to deter. Next, please. So the U.S. will, in fact, both modernize and expand their strategic and theater nuclear forces. The 2022 Nuclear Posture Review stated, we recognize that the new strategic environment involves may be necessary to consider nuclear strategy force adjustments. In 23, the Nuclear Posture Commission, current strategic forces program of record is necessary but not sufficient because it does not account for evolving Russian and PRC nuclear arsenals. And they proposed over 80 recommendations to include prepare to upload weapons from the hedge, increase planned procurement of Columbia SSBN, B-21 bombers, and the accompanying LRSO, and service life extension of the Ohio SSBN, as well as deploy 450 Sentinel ICs with multiple nuclear warheads, and pursue feasibility of 50 to 50 road mobiles, and also reverse the conversion of the SL tubes. And Secretary of the Air Force Kendall made some very similar comments, but some very interesting ones also. He said additional dual-use aircraft, because we have in fact tested Alcoms being dropped from cargo aircraft. But the other one is other means. What did he mean by other means? Next, please. We also have the Project 2025, which is apparently the Trump administration blueprint. They advocating for accelerating the strategic nuclear force modernization timelines. They needed to account for Chinese nuclear expansion, to include procuring more SNF, upload, and review TNF capabilities in addition to SLICM-N. And missile defense has been under-prioritized and underfunded and should be top priority. And lo and behold, on January 27th, President Trump, executive order, missile defense is top priority, directed DoD to provide an answer in 60 days on how it would develop and deploy missile defenses of U.S. homeland, allies, and deployed forces. MDA held an industry day on February 18th. Industry white papers have been submitted, but to date, no 60-day report. So what can the U.S. do? Next, please. So the U.S. response options, as I mentioned, we can upload from the stockpile, reverse treaty modifications that limited warheads, expand IC, SL, and bomber production, expand the theater nuclear force, expand long-range offensive conventional strike to threaten their ICs, SLs, and bombers, develop a more balanced offense and defense by expanding the strategic and theater air and missile defense and create an integrated offense and defense. And I'll address each of those in the following charts. Next, please. So if we look at the upload capability, we see the U.S. systems there on the left-hand side and the numbers and types of weapons that they carry. And so if we look at the bottom, we've got 700 SNDVs deployed. We've got 1550 stout start countable warheads that, but when you add in the actual bomber warheads, that's 2242. In terms of heads available, we've got 1630, so that gives us 3872 that we could upload to. In terms of upload timeline, we can upload the bombers in 24 to 48 hours. We can upload the SSBNs about one in a week as they come in off of patrol. So about 6 months for the fleet to rotate the entire fleet. For the ICBMs, though, we're short on manpower, so that's going to take 3 to 4 years. Next, please. So we could do additional hold on. So we could reconstitute the SSBN and bomber warhead capacity that's been reduced by treaty requirements. We've got 4 SL tubes for each SSBN that were filled with concrete, so they couldn't be used. 4 tubes times 14 SSBNs equals 56 SLs times 8 warheads equals 448 warheads. Tubes can be replaced in 1 to 2 weeks. 1 to 2 months per SSBN, 14 to 28 months for the fleet. The B-52, we currently have, I think it's 42 nuclear capable. We could renuclearize 30 more to carry a nuclear SRO, so 30 times 20 equals 600. It would only take weeks to months to recertify, but it's going to take years to reduce the LRSO. The B-1B, we could convert back to nuclear by reinstalling the wiring harness and external hard points for LRSO. That would take approximately 3 years. 60 times 12 equals 720. That gives a total of 1768 additional warheads. The warheads exist for the SLs, but new warhead production would be required for additional LRSO. Next, please. For additional SNF production, we can extend production for initial 50 to 100 per road mobile. The Air Force recently announced that they're probably not going to refurbish the existing silos, but they're going to build brand new silos, so we could have additional silos also. We could also upload the Sentinel to 3 RVs. They're designed for that. The U.S. PAVE-PEFR program was tested 7 RVs on the Minuteman III, but at a significantly reduced range. Sentinel has a greater throw weight capability than Minuteman III, could carry more than 3 RVs or potentially 68 Mark IV class RVs. For the Columbia SSBN, we could extend production, perhaps 4 to 6 more SSBNs. For the B-21 bomber, we could extend production and accelerate production, perhaps 5,200 more at 5 to 15 plus a year. Also, as I mentioned earlier, dual mode aircraft, cargo aircraft with launching LRSO. And also the Ohio SSBN, we could delay retirement for 1 to 3 years. However, we would definitely then run into manning problems as we tried to deploy Columbias, which have approximately the same manning as the Ohio, and still keep the Ohios in the fleet. Next, please. We could also expand the theater nuclear forces. Current force consists of about 400 bombs in U.S. and Europe with survivability and nuclear release issues. We could actually produce about 1,000 TNF warheads in 1 to 3 years at an acceptable risk to strategic warhead program of record. We have thousands of low-yield pits that are available. We also have potential U.S. theater missile capabilities. We have thousands available for the Army. We have GLMRS, we have PRISM, we have SM-6, we have Tomahawk, we have OpFires, we have the LRHW, and the Army has announced that they're going to be developing and deploying brand new medium-range and intermediate-range ballistic missiles. For the Navy, we have the Harpoon, SLAM-MER, SM-6, Tomahawk, and CPS. And for the Air Force, we have the James Howe, JASSM, ARG-MER, which would be a real good one, GBU-53, and the Arrow, which would also be a very good one as it's hypersonic. So the U.S. theater nuclear force could be significantly expanded in 1 to 3 years. Next, please. For offensive strike against the Russian SNF, that would require long-range missiles with 3,000 to 4,000 kilometer range. This chart illustrates the approximate location of the Russian ICBM force. Space Development Agency is deploying a constellation of over 100 LEO satellites capable of detecting, identifying, tracking, and targeting mobile missiles and bombers. And as I noted, the Army is developing medium-range and intermediate-range ballistic missiles. Next, please. For offensive strike against China, that also requires long-range missiles. In the lower left-hand corner, you see the silo fields that have been deployed. Their location is shown in the center upper on the left-hand side, and then that left-hand chart shows the location of the Chinese theater and the remainder of their strategic nuclear forces. On the right-hand side is the location of their airfields, as well as the SSBA base down on Hainan Island. Next, please. Extended defenses, or rather expanded defenses, are the most rapid and cost-effective response to threat nuclear forces because we can defeat them. Strategic defense systems, terrestrial near-term, we've got the ground-based interceptor, we've got Aegis ashore, we've got the glide phase interceptor, we have THAAD ER, and far term we've got DEW and relay mirrors. For cruise missile defense, we've got fighters and AWACS, Patriot, NSAMs, IFPC, and potentially a long-range interceptor with a 5,000 to 6,000 kilometer range. For space, we have space-based interceptors, the old brilliant pebbles, coil guns, neutral particle beams, lasers, and high-power microwaves. Space-based interceptors we could probably have in 3 to 4 years. The others are going to be longer, 10 to 15 years. For theater defense systems, we have THAAD, Patriot, NSAMs, IFPC, Again, DEW, both laser, high power microwave, and EW, as well as fighters with AWACS. But the current defenses can perform well against traditional theater and air and missile threats, as illustrated in Ukraine. However, the numbers need to be significantly increased. But developments in defense countermeasures will require developments of countermeasures. And right now, the best countermeasure is the hypersonic vehicles that can very high speed and can maneuver and are virtually impossible to defend against in the terminal. Would have to get a mid-course. Next, please. An example of this shown on this chart. If we look at the bottom, defense effectiveness, as defense effectiveness increases, that forces the attacker to go to increasingly sophisticated and extended responses to the point where they actually have to conduct a defensive suppression attack prior to conducting the main attack. If we look at Ukraine, even at defense effectiveness of 0.7 to 0.9, as Russia has no effective defense suppression capabilities and cannot suspend combat operations, they continue to just try and overwhelm Ukraine defenses at significant cost. So an integrated offense-defense is the most effective response to the Russian and Chinese buildup of nuclear forces. Next, please. In conclusion, Russia is determined to maintain superpower status and regain their empire. They have to rely on nuclear weapons. They plan to win by achieving escalation dominance at all levels of nuclear conflict, and this guides Russian nuclear force development. Russia is a highly dangerous adversary. They're far less vulnerable than the U.S. and a risk taker. Strategic nuclear forces armed with new technology nuclear warheads provide game-changing capabilities. China's rapid strategic nuclear breakout is unprecedented and constitutes a classic strategic deception and has precipitated a new strategic epoch. But the icy estimates of Chinese SNF and TNF are inconsistent with reality, and both Russian and Chinese strategic and theater nuclear forces' size and capabilities are characterized by great uncertainty. Next, please. So to deter a two-peer competitor, the U.S. requires an integrated force of nuclear weapons, strategic and tactical, long-range precision strike, and defenses. U.S. options to develop an integrated force, as I mentioned earlier, we can upload, reverse, we can expand production, expand the theater force, expand long-range offensive conventional strike, expand defenses, but the U.S. has the capability to respond in a timely manner. They just need the vision, the will, and the leadership. Any questions?
Jim, thank you very much. A number of people had the same question as I did, and that is, do the Russians or Chinese really believe that they can use a considerable number of theater nuclear weapons and not result in not only escalation to the strategic nuclear level, but creating environmental disasters like nuclear winter and things like that? Because a lot of people look at this and say, well, these people can't be that irrational, where they would actually think that they could use dozens and dozens of nuclear warheads, maybe 100 or more at the theater level, which is what Yeltsin said he was going to order them to develop back in 1999, as you said. But the question is, is it bluff or is it serious?
They're serious.
Okay, can you lay out why you think that?
Well, if you go back and look at some of the literature, for example, on nuclear winter, the Russians used that as a propaganda, so to speak, to try to reduce the U.S. They did not believe in nuclear winter because they were not going to use that kind of an attack that would produce a nuclear winter. In terms of numbers of weapons, yes, Mikhailov is absolutely correct. He stated that the current force is completely unusable, and he was referring to the fleet of SS-18s, 19s at that point in time.
Right.
And he said that we do in fact need to develop low yield, that's tens to hundreds of tons of yield, highly accurate weapons that we can in fact use to once again become an instrument of policy. And it's not tens or hundreds, it's thousands. 10 to 10,000 is not is a warfighting force. That's why they plan to develop it. That's their intent.
Do you think the Chinese are going to copy that strategy?
I absolutely do.
And what would you, the next question is, we're at 11 o'clock, but extraordinary briefing. Thank you, Jim. It scared everybody to death. But my question is, given the high uncertainty, people argue, the critics argue and say, well, we're just saying that the upbound of the Chinese and Russian forces could be the numbers you talk about, because they're basically merging a lot of stuff they have, and then they're going to add to that and have multiple wars. But that's the upside. The question is, if you assume they're not going to build this, which a lot of people do, then they think we can show restraint too. What's your sense of how you ask? I mean, we got a new administration. They're going to have to look at, where does the U.S. go in terms of, do we build more warheads? Do we build more capability? How would you recommend to them?
It's got to be a balanced force. Yes, we need to certainly increase our the bedrock, the foundation. We have to continue with the modernization of our ICs, SLs, and bombers. That's foundational. Then we build on that as necessary. We need to build out further on our theater nuclear force, but not in terms of bombs. We need standoff weapons, both ground and air launched, and perhaps sea launched. But the big one and the one that has most effect near term is defenses. Because if we can deny them their attack objectives, we can deter them.
Let me ask you a final question, and that is, the Posture Commission laid out their view that instead of looking at nuclear forces as a means of deterring the United States, it is to allow Russia and China to engage in aggression and keep the United States out of the fight so we don't come to the defense of our friends. Is that an accurate view of the world?
It absolutely is accurate, because that's what Putin intended on with his invasion of Ukraine and his initial threats to use nuclear weapons. He hoped, and actually expected that because of the threats that not only would the U.S. and NATO not intervene, but they would not support Ukraine. Right. Well, he failed there, because we didn't. But when you look at the U.S. support to Ukraine, we definitely kept in mind the nuclear threat because of the timing and the amounts of aid that we in fact sent to Ukraine. As an example, after a long period of time, we finally sent them 35 M1 tanks. We have over 3,000 in our inventory. We sent them a few hundred. We sent them a few hundred pack of missiles, and we have over 5,000.
No, I understand. We did pull our punches with respect to Ukraine, which is, I think, what Mr. Putin was trying to do. So we basically took our deterrent off the table while we prevented Mr. Putin from using nukes. Thank God. We didn't prevent him from going in conventionally, unfortunately, or tragically. So, Jim, I want to thank you for kind of a chilling brief. But nonetheless, it is, the numbers could be very true. So I do have one final question, very important. People have said China doesn't have enough nuclear warhead fuel to build that number of warheads you're talking about. What's your sense? How do you respond to that?
They wouldn't have been built the silos if they didn't have the missiles. They wouldn't have build the missiles if they didn't have the warheads. They wouldn't build the warheads if they didn't have the fuel. They've got the fuel there someplace. If you take what's known, what's accepted known, and maximize the number of warheads for that amount of fuel, you can stretch that out to about 3,000. So
Okay.
that still leaves you somewhat short. So but you can go to composite pits. You can use reactor grade plutonium.
Right.
China may in fact have received plutonium or HEU from Russia. We just don't know. They
But
may
they could get
have,
it from Russia because Russia has literally plenty of this stuff.
yes, and
Okay.
they could have sites that we simply do not know about.
True. True. Well, Jim, again, thank you very much. Kimberly, thank you for your great work in organizing this. I want to give a shout out to my president, Jim Petrosky, who has joined us here, as well as some of our colleagues that are on in attendance today. Thank you for joining us. But remember, next week, General Gabera is going to be appearing in person at the Capitol Hill Club. 7:45 a.m. is when we're going to be organizing for breakfast. He is head of A10, as you know. He's going to be talking about the Sentinel program and the B-21, both of which are critical elements of our nuclear deterrent. Again, Jim, thank you for joining us today. Thank you to our audience and to Kimberly and our president. And we look forward to seeing you guys, everybody, next week. Take care.